Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm thrilled to have with me today. Alec has a great story. He has gone through a lot, and he's going to share that with us today. And my hope is not only will you learn from his story, but you'll be able to apply those lessons to your compliance program going forward. So, Alec, with that somewhat long winded introduction, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
Alec, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought us together?
My background started in coaching basketball and as a school guidance counselor. I majored in psychology and ended up with a master's in social work and got into education and it really enjoyed doing it. But to be perfectly transparent, I had a kid on the way and I was worried about how I was going to pay the bills and tried to make a transition into the pharmaceutical industry, which I did. And it was a successful career for quite some time until the wheels came off.
And how did the wheels come off?
So essentially, probably 25 years into my career, I excelled to senior vice president, head of sales for a biotech company. We had a sublingual fentanyl spray indicated for breakthrough pain in cancer patients. And the wheels came off for two reasons. The first reason was that the bulk of the medication being prescribed was being prescribed off label. Doctors are allowed to prescribe off label, but pharmaceutical companies are not allowed to promote off label. And their findings were obvious that we were promoting off label. So outside of just cancer pain, this medication was essentially being used for almost every kind of pain you could imagine. Number two, we inappropriately incentivized physicians to prescribe more of the medication to patients who may or may not have needed it in exchange for speaker honorariums. What are speaker honorariums? Speaker honorariums, in our terms at least, were a cover up to basically bribe physicians and put money in their pockets in exchange for their commitment to put more patients on the medication that we represented.
And what happened to Alec?
Ultimately, what happened was I was indicted. I went several years waiting for sentencing, which in some ways was probably worse than the time that I actually did inside of prison. But like I said, I was indicted. I ultimately pled guilty. I was the first of seven that were indicted to plead guilty. Only two of us pled guilty. The others went to trial and were convicted. In any case, I was sentenced to 26 months in federal prison,
And
followed
did
by
you
3 years of probation.
have you completed both of those terms now?
I have, yes.
We have to talk about that background to move to the part that I think is as significant as any other, and that's what I'm not sure you call it this or I wrote it down, but it's shifting mindsets. And so I want to talk about that in the context of your journey and how we jointly can help white collar professionals understand that it's not just business. So where where does the white collar professional start? I don't think anybody starts with the idea, "Well, let me get up and commit fraud today."
That's right. That's the biggest problem. And that's why it's so rampant. White collar crime is all over. Everywhere we go, everyone we talk to, you're going to come across people. In fact, the more successful the people are, the more likely they are that they are in the gray area. And gray just doesn't cut it, especially in heavily scrutinized and regulated industries such as pharmaceuticals. But there are a multitude of industries in corporate America that are heavily regulated. And if people were to just lift a little bit underneath the hood and look a little closer, they're going to see a lot of red flags. My issue was that I looked up to these people. I surrounded myself, or I tried to at least, to surround myself by the most successful people I could possibly be around. And I became desensitized to the fact that these successful people were skirting the law in an effort to make more money. And it's almost like they got a pass. They certainly got a pass for me back, meaning even if I knew just from listening that they were doing something that could, quite frankly, be easily construed as illegal and potentially result in criminal charges, I just ignored it and basically rationalized and justified to myself that if these people that I'm around are so successful and living such great lives and have what it appears to be everything that a man could want and desire, that they must be doing something right and I must be doing something wrong. So I need to learn from these people. So essentially, I chose these people as my mentors. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made. Wrong messaging. Growing up, I grew up with the mentality of win or lose. That's all that mattered. You either win and you're successful, or you lose and clearly you were not successful. And so I'm surrounding myself by all of these winners because they have obtained all of these achievements monetarily, prestige, position wise, title wise, so forth and so on. And I just figured that if these people are not deliberately going out with intent to harm, but rather just conducting business in a rather aggressive like manner, that it must be okay and that this is the way to go. And again, based on my upbringing of win versus lose, it seemed to me that if I wanted to win, I needed to work in the gray and become very comfortable working in the gray. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. I became comfortable. I put myself on the top of that slippery slope, which I like to refer to very often. And that's the biggest mistake you can make. Once you're on that slippery slope, you have nowhere to go but down. And the key to avoiding these issues is to not even come close to the line. And what you'll find with white collar professionals is that so many of them walk that fine line every single day. That's not a line that I'm willing to walk anymore. I only wish I had learned this revelation much sooner. I would have avoided a lot of heartache, problems, devastation, crippling effects, damage, not only to myself and my loved ones, but the people that I don't know all across the country who were exposed to a medication that more often than not, I think, from what I've learned, read, and heard, they did not need or would necessarily even benefit long term from.
Alec, I'm very hard driven myself, was sort of Joe Jock in high school, and I've kept that competitive spirit. Sounds like to me you're pretty competitive yourself. But there's a way to channel that competitiveness to make a truly superior or at least a good salesperson. What do you see some of the things that an in-house corporate compliance professional can bring to help channel that just drive and passion that many of us have to do the best that we can do beyond simply having a strong moral foundation? How can a corporation really take the basics of what we have and wind us up and say go, but we go in the right direction and we don't cross that line?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I think that they have to be willing, open, and ready to try and understand a salesman's mentality, or in your case, an athlete's mentality, which by the way, we hired tons of former Division I college ball players and even professional athletes because we know that they have that competitive edge. And that's exactly what we're looking for. And we're hoping that they will transform that into whatever industry, sales industry they're in, because you're still going to get ranked. It's all about quotas and numbers and dollars and who's first and who's last. So we try to tap into those types of people, but it's critical for compliance to somehow, some way break that misnomer that compliance is the enemy. I can tell you from being in sales my whole career that up until very recently, I always saw compliance as an adversary, someone that I wanted to avoid, not engage in conversation with, and certainly not listen to, because I only saw compliance as getting in the way of me achieving my goals and aspirations. That needs to change. And I've learned from my own personal experience that when I joined this company and I was head of sales for the first year or two, we didn't even have a compliance department. We had an HR manager who didn't even have her master's degree yet in human resource management. So our priorities were clear, and that was drive sales and don't stop on a red light, just keep going, green, go. And now I realize that had compliance been in place, and had I had that open relationship where I could actually talk to them, let them know what I'm trying to achieve, and then work with them in a manner where they can help me achieve my goals without deterring me from being successful, and also helping me understand that without them, I am at tremendous risk, because that's the truth. Had there been a compliance department in place, I wouldn't have gone to prison. Now, that doesn't absolve me for any of the things that I did wrong in my guilt, which is why I pled guilty, of course. It doesn't absolve me at all, but it's a fact. And for people working in future companies, especially those young ones coming out of college or graduate school with aspirations to work for somebody extremely wealthy and follow their lead, a major red flag should be that if they don't have a compliance department in place, and a department in place that's truly willing to sit down and listen and understand the mentality of someone who is extremely passionate and competitive about winning, then there's going to be a disconnect. So I think education on both sides needs to take place. Education to the compliance people on how to work with someone like ourselves, and then education to the salespeople on why it's so important to work with compliance to avoid devastation that I had to experience.
Alec, let me pick up on the point about compliance understanding operations. That's not something we talk enough about in compliance. We often talk about compliance dictating, talking to, educating, communicating with the frontline BD folks, but we rarely talk about it going the other way. If you were going to counsel a compliance professional, a chief compliance officer, how would you help them think through exactly that point? Sit down and understand these people's pressures. Sit down and understand what you can do. How would you really help them understand that?
I would personally work with them by sharing my personal experiences and the highs and lows of being in sales, the day to day pressure, the constant scrutinization of your manager, your director, your head of sales. Because on the sales end, the only thing you're going to hear about is whether or not you closed a deal or you didn't close a deal. So I think that the compliance department needs to not only work with the salesperson, but the manager, the director, the regional director, all the way up to the top, including the owner or the executive chairman of the board, to help them truly understand that compliance is put in place because people need guardrails. People need rules, regulations. They need structure, especially salespeople, because we can lose our way. We are so obsessed with winning and being number one that we almost are unable to hear what compliance is saying. So I think that the people who work in the compliance end of business, I think there's a bunch of psychology that goes into it, and that they really need to understand the psychology of a salesperson and what motivates them, what drives them, what makes them tick, and help the compliance people speak to these salespeople in a way where they don't come across as the police, right? The corporate police department, but rather someone who has the same goals and aspirations, which is to win, be successful, see the company thrive, but simultaneously making sure that they are protecting what has been gained and won, right? Because in our situation, what good is winning or gaining when you're going to lose everything at the end? Or what good is winning and gaining if you're going to put it all at risk. I mean, gambling is not or does not belong in business. A business should be something that's well thought out with very clear goals, expectations, objectives that are met. And finally, there needs to be real consequences for those who do not follow the letter of the law. And I can tell you that in corporate America with white collar professionals, that when you are successful and you are number one, based on my experience of 25 plus years in sales, I have never seen the number one guy get fired. Although they knew deep down inside in their soul and their heart that something wasn't exactly right. They just kind of turned the blind eye. And who was it that was turning the blind eye? Probably not the compliance department, but probably someone on more of the business sales end that is sending a message from the very, very top that we are putting profits over people. And as soon as that message comes from the top down, it changes the structure and the landscape of the entire environment you work in. And it becomes a ripple effect and it becomes crippling. You create a bad habit and then you follow it up with another bad habit and another bad habit and another bad habit. And you dig yourself deeper and deeper. And if you want to continue to grow the sales and the business, you got to keep digging. And you're digging yourself a hole that if you get in trouble, you're not going to get out of it. I will say that based on, again, my experience, the majority of successful people that I've come across have not gotten in trouble. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people continue to take these risks, especially white collar professionals. I really can't speak to blue collar, but the white collar professionals by nature, they're very narcissistic people. They have enormous egos. They believe that because they're successful, they are above the law and that they are doing everything right and they should be applauded and recognized and rewarded. And if anyone tries to criticize them in any way, shape, or form, they are going to fight back with a vengeance. So it's a real struggle between right and wrong and compliance and sales. And I don't see any astronomical achievements since I've been indicted. I talk to people in the industry every day, and the vast majority have told me that nothing has changed.
Let me change the subject a little bit to accountability and accountability in your personal journey and why you think accountability is so important. I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I had a aha moment that time to stop or enough is enough or whatever we call it. So I have some understanding of that. But what was your aha moment?
My aha moment, unfortunately, wasn't until I was sitting in California on the water having lunch with one of my regional directors talking sales, where I got a call from my civil attorney who told me that he had just learned that I had been moved from a person of interest to a subject in a criminal investigation, and that he fully expected me to be moved to a target, and that he could no longer represent me, and that I needed to find a criminal attorney immediately. That was my aha moment. A little bit late, I would say. And I immediately said, "Give me the check. This business lunch is over. So is the next 3 days that I had planned." And I went back to my hotel and called the company and started seeking out criminal attorneys. And boy, can I tell you, my life changed. It did a full 180 from that point moving forward. And it's been a struggle ever since, quite frankly.
So, what has been the role of accountability in your personal journey of rehabilitation?
The
Are you
role
accountable?
of my role has been, in my opinion, pretty significant. Like I said, I was one of only two of seven that were indicted to accept responsibility and plead guilty. I was the first of all seven to plead guilty. And that was another aha moment. It was actually a moment of relief I finally felt like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel because I saw that I no longer needed to lie or would benefit by lying or manipulating or whatever it is that you call it when a salesman pats himself on the back and says, "Wow, I made a sale. I did a number on that customer." I realized that this is the federal government and I wasn't going to manipulate or lie myself out of anything. And the only way, somehow, if anyhow, I was going to make it through was to accept responsibility, plead guilty, and begin atoning for my misfortunes. I have done numerous speaking events with universities. I have spoken at conferences, just recently, the National Healthcare Fraud Conference in New Orleans. I've done a number of podcasts, and not everyone is nearly as nice to me as you are, meaning they've really come at me hard and really hit me where I needed to be hit to knock some sense into me and make sure that I understood just how bad I screwed up. And by going through that, I have found it to be extremely therapeutic, obviously humbling, but also an opportunity for me to grow and develop because I did wrong. I hurt a lot of people. And although maybe some people think my life should be over, it's not. And I have two daughters, 23 and 16, and I live for them. And what I think about every day is how do I help my daughters understand that under no circumstances should there be ever a reason to work in the gray? That's my mission for my daughters because I know that my 16-year-old could be taking a math exam and easily look to her neighbor for a couple of answers on a sheet of paper. I did it growing up. A lot of people did it. I try to tell my kids now, not even that, not even copying someone's homework. And the reason why is, again, it's the slippery slope. I believe that if you do one thing wrong and you get away with it, you're more likely to do something else wrong that's going to be more profound. And the bigger the risk, the bigger the downfall in the end of the day, as evidenced by what I went through.
You have some really interesting thoughts on criminal thinking as a form of sickness and greed as the root cause of ethical lapses. As I mentioned, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and in my program, we say it's an allergy of the body coupled with an obsession of the mind. Meaning, if I have a drink, I can't stop. And if I don't have a drink, I think about it all the time. So that leads to part two. Now I have a daily reprieve from that. And so I look at it one day at a time. But how does your thinking, and I'm really intrigued by your thinking of this as a sickness. And but for me, if it's a sickness, there's probably a cure. So could you maybe give us Alec's thoughts on that?
I agree. I think it is a sickness. I think it's an addiction. It's an addiction to want to win so badly that you'll do just about anything to be on top because you've been given all the wrong messages growing up. All your priorities are wrong. They're all around money, materialistic things, cars, houses, clothing, watches. I don't blame my parents for anything. I'm responsible for myself. I'm a grown man. I'm 50 years old, but I do try vehemently or feverishly to instill in my kids that risk taking is not the type of life that they want to live. And what I learned growing up and doing a ton of reading and just researching, I was learning that the bigger the risk, the more reward, the more money they were making. That you had to take major risk to be one of the big successful people in life. And that's a message that I personally think is very detrimental to a lot of people, especially white collar professionals. And you mentioned the term criminal thinking, and I took a course on that in prison, criminal thinking, and learned a lot about it. And it's criminal thinking. It's constant rationalization, justification for what you're doing, how much money you're making the company, how many people you hired, how many jobs you gave them. None of that matters if in the end of the day you're doing harm to to the greater good. If you're putting I before we, there's a problem. It should always be about the community. It should be about us, not me. And it was never that way for me. It was always about how I could prove to everyone that I was worthy of the accolades and the positions and the money that I was obtaining.
So you mentioned the work you're doing with both corporations, compliance officers, the legal community, speaking at FBI conferences. How has all of that helped your recovery?
I would say it's helped me tremendously. Yeah, I did a joint conference too, actually, with the FBI agent that indicted me, Paul Baumrein, who's a retired FBI agent now. And the topic of the talk was inside the mind of a healthcare fraud offender. And I think by sharing my different thought processes throughout the entire course of my career with these people in law enforcement, it gives them an opportunity to approach these people and handle these people in a way where they might be much more successful. Because oftentimes, if you're doing something wrong and you're willing to own up to it quickly and make amends, you can dig yourself out of trouble. But white collar professionals who have tons of money and think they have the resources to buy themselves out of any trouble they find themselves in, they're just not, it just doesn't resonate with them. The message doesn't resonate. They've got these blinders on and they think it doesn't apply to them. And the question that I ask myself, and I will ask anybody else that I come across in the future who's extremely wealthy, whom I also know is playing with fire, what makes you think that you're better or different than anybody else in this world that's following the law and abiding by the rules and doing it the hard way? It's always harder to do the right thing. It's easy to fall into bad habits and make excuses. So, for my personal growth and development, I've had to basically take a monumental fall from grace and start with nothing at the age of 50 and try to somehow work my way back. But when I work my way back, I'm not referring to trying to obtain the same goals and achievements that I had in the past. My goals and achievements are inherently different. Now it's about work life family balance, being the best father I can be to my children, being a family man, setting a good example. My kids know what happened. They read about it, they watched about it, there was a movie on it. They know the bad side. But what I need to do from this point moving forward until the day I'm dead is show my kids the good side. And I hope that when my kids become parents, that they will be able to pass on the same messages that I'm now passing to my children onto their kids. Because I don't want to see this happen to certainly anyone in my family. I also don't want my kids chasing the wrong dream, like the American dream. What is the American dream? Most people will tell you it's cars, money, and yachts and private planes. That's not the American dream in my eyes anymore. And I think that's a huge problem that we have with society, that people don't really understand that the American dream is peace and happiness. Being able to put your head on the pillow at night and sleep well and know that you set a good example for your kids and everyone around you. And that if you're really lucky, that you're actually being a positive contribution to society. Because if you really want to be successful, you need to find a way to have an effect on society as a whole and really make an impact on this world in a positive manner. And I certainly was not doing that. All I was doing was trying to improve my life, my wife's life at the time, and my two children's lives. That's all I cared about. And I'm embarrassed and ashamed to say that. But by not being truthful and honest, I'm getting in the way of my own personal growth and development. And more importantly, potential future success of my children.
Alec, I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about your books. So could you tell us your books and where our audience may be able to find out more about you, connect with you, and or purchase your books?
Sure. I have two books out there. One is called Prepare, and Prepare is essentially a book for people who have found themselves in the crosshairs of the government, probably under investigation or a looming investigation, and what to do. And the first thing that we preach is take responsibility, own up to it, plead guilty, and tell the truth from that point moving forward, because that's the only way to salvation. If you want to continue to lie, manipulate, justify, go to court and try to fight everybody and convince people that you didn't do anything wrong when the evidence is abundantly obvious that you have, then you're continuing to just do yourself more harm. And for me personally, not to sound selfish, but I have done a tremendous amount of harm to myself as well as others. But I'm done trying to harm myself. I finally realized what you said, that you're a recovering alcoholic. You came to the realization that alcohol, in the end of the day, was doing you more harm than good. For me, my obsession with winning and being successful and getting engulfed in this criminal sort of like thinking was very harmful to me. It was destructive. It was devastating. And like I said, it hurt so many people. And the only way for me to move forward in my life and to look myself in the mirror after what has transpired is to know that I'm at least trying to do better moving forward and that I'm on a different path. And this different path, I'm very confident is the right path. And I only wish I had taken this path from day one. And that's the path I hope to put my children on.
Alec, do you have a website or LinkedIn profile that our listeners could link with or check out?
Yeah. So my website is www.aburlakoff.com. And also, by the way, the other book is called Selling Hard Lessons Learned. And that's essentially an autobiography integrated with my sales mannerisms, techniques, and strategies. It shows everyone kind of why I did what I did, what makes me tick, why I was successful, and how I ultimately ended up being an abysmal failure. And I hope it's a lesson to everyone who it was young like me coming out of college or grad school thinking they're going to take the world over or take the world by storm. And they're going to go out there and try to work for the wealthiest person they could find, like I did. I worked for a billionaire. I thought that I hit the jackpot working for a billionaire. I thought he was going to teach me everything I needed to know and take me to the promised land, when in reality, his criminal thinking took me to prison. So aburlakoff.com is my website. Prepares one of my books. Selling Hard Lessons Learned is another book. And yes, you can find me on LinkedIn just under Alec Burlakoff. And I'm happy to correspond with anyone, good, bad, or indifferent. Unfortunately, this experience has provided me with one positive thing, and that's thick skin. Because without thick skin, I don't think I'd be able to get myself out of bed every day at this point.
Alec, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to thank you again, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on today.